Before I start, I wonder, is Charlie Findlay here?
Yes.
Charlie? Charlie? I'd like to give this drawing of the station as originally built to Charlie, because whenever I came back to Tullamore a long time ago on the train, Charlie would shake my hand getting off the train, and there's very few station masters in Ireland that will do that. Charlie, thank you very, very much. Thanks. Thanks, Charlie. Possibly the greatest disaster in the late 18th century in Europe was the earthquake which destroyed the city of Lisbon in 1755, and 40,000 people died. The same number were made homeless. The entire city was destroyed. And what mattered afterwards, though, which really caught the public imagination, was the reconstruction of Lisbon. And this came about by, there was a dictator who was running Portugal at the time called Sebastian de Melo, the Marquis de Pombal. And he immediately got to work on the day after and buried the dead and housed the homeless. But most importantly, he put together a plan for the city of Lisbon, and within a year that had begun to be implemented. And it was very unlike any European plan at the time. It had the entire city as is, and it was designed very much on regular lines. And Sebastian Melo was a great admirer of the ideals of the Enlightenment, and he was very much into rational planning, into order, into regularity, and the rebuilding of Lisbon became quite a well-known project in Europe at the time. And significantly, Sebastian de Melo was a Freemason. He was a very prominent member of the Masonic order. And the rebuilding of Lisbon became very much a trademark. The Masonic order pushed it as exemplification of the kind of ideals they espoused of common sense, order, rationalism particularly. And in Tullamore in 1785, the town burnt down, and young Lord Tullamore arrives, and the first thing he does is hands out 550 to the tenants across down the road here, and he begins to rebuild Tullamore. And Lord Tullamore was also a very enthusiastic member of the Masonic order, and I cannot but believe that the reconstruction of Tullamore in 1785 was inspired by the ideas promulgated by the Masonic order, which Sebastian de Melo had very much pushed forward. So the very first ideology that created Tullamore was rationalism. And that was followed pretty rapidly by capitalism. Capitalism is a terrific ideology. It creates innovation, wealth, originality, new thinking, but it also tends land, labour and capital. The land was there, the capital was there, but the labour then floods in, and Tullamore begins to expand with the arrival of the canal, with the railways, and becomes quite an industrial base. But the two social problems arise from capitalism. One is the fact that industries, distilling, brewing flax tanneries tend to throw all their crap into the river, so you get pollution. And the river here in Tullamore is literally a hidden stream between all the houses. It's not visible anywhere. It was literally the sewer that went through the town. And the second outcome often is cheap labour that gives rise to slums, that gives rise to other problems. So the third ideology that forms Tullamore is socialism. And the first Tullamore Urban District Council, about 1900, the first thing they start doing is building terrific new social housing up in Ermid Terrace, places like that. And that continues through. It gives us the wonderful County Hospital, 1936, the first outdoor swimming pool, and continues on into the terrific housing schemes of Pearse Park, Marion Place in the 1950s. And from the 50s onwards, it's very much guided by the socialist ideas of the town planner Frank Gibney, who did the first plan for Tullamore. And Gibney was a very big adherent of Ebenezer Howard, the ideas of the Garden City, and in which work, play, they're separated, there's good public spaces. And to a certain extent, somebody's battery is running low.
It's not plugged in.
Helps immensely if it. Okay. Any better? So, Gibney's socialist ideas are formulated in 1950. And effectively, Tullamore has been working out those socialist ideas of Gibney's plan ever since. And I put up a slide there showing Tullamore generally as it is today. And I suppose the big determinant is Gibney's the bypass, which he laid down in 1950, which got delivered about, 2000, 50 years later. And within that, he had the idea of town centre and 4 neighbourhoods. And 3 of those neighbourhoods are pretty well filled out now. The other features of Tullamore as it is today are, the big one to me always is, I suppose, is not the unknown, but the extraordinary amenity of Charleville Estate on the western side of the town, which is has this marvellous, we effectively use it with the consent of the Huttonbury family as almost as a public park, which I think is a wonderful gift. That is there. There's the amenity of the canal and the trees, which I notice several blew down a couple of nights ago. And there are 3 defining industrial areas. In the most recent plan for Tullamore, we already have the distillery to the south, which is, has brought an international dimension to Tullamore. And then up on the northern side, the most recent plan has zoned 2 areas for what they call special employment zones, which I think will be very, very much determinants of the town into the future. But the future in Tullamore will be determined very much by the 4th ideology, which is environmentalism, which is coming up the road. And we already see that in the Living River project, which is gradually beginning to change how the river is viewed. So, as I said, we've had 3. Tullamore has evolved since the 1950s. Lord Charleville gave us set out a planned town, regular streets, And since the 1950s, generally the form of Tullamore has been evolving in a rational fashion, generally in a rational fashion. And from that, we've got the bypass, obviously. That's the big one, I suppose. To a certain extent, its delivery must coincided with the tenure of Brian Cowan as Taoiseach. We've got well-planned industrial estates. The town park, the wonderful town park, which was first outlined by Gibney in 1950. We have new Main Street, a new retail street, again, sort of suggested by Gibney. There's the marvellous amenity of the town beginning to recognise the canal out there with the deck along Bury Quay. What we haven't got, there are two notable things which have been in nearly every plan since 1950 and which still haven't arrived. One is the harbour, and the harbour is still, I went to have a look at it today, is still a totally inaccessible, walled off, inhospitable area, literally cut off from the town. And the second one, but that's evolving, is the usage of the river, the riverside walks. So, as Deirdre McDermott knows it very well, being a fellow planner, statutory planning is the delivery vehicle. And we haven't been very successful in that in the last few years. The last big plan that was made was the 2010-2016 plan, which got extended out to 2021, 2020. And that was a bit of a disaster. They began to make the plan in 2008, and that you couldn't have picked a worse time. The economy was flying. But what was really crazy was that at the time we had a national spatial strategy, and it had the idea of combining Athlone, Tullamore and Mullingar together to be a counterbalance to Dublin. It was nuts. And there was never any money behind it. There was never any political will behind it. It went nowhere, but that flawed the entire process. So the plan that was made in 2010 was on shaky ground for a start. And then because of the housing boom at the time, it got all its projections wrong. I think it had estimated that the population would grow by 5,000 in the period of the plan. In fact, it grew by something like 300. So it was just the wrong time to make a plan. So that wasn't a very happy experience. Now, in all fairness, the key element in any plan is what's called the works objectives. What are you actually going to do? You know, you can have grand notions about the future and, wouldn't it be great if Tullamore is lovely and, but what matters is what will we actually do during this period? And they did actually, there were three things which were delivered out of that plan. The northern side, the northern third of O'Connor Square was pedestrianised. The pedestrian bridges across here and at Bury Quay were built, and the link through from Rose Lawn, which is under delivery at present, arrived. And that plan was to run out in 2016, but it got extended out to 2020. And then the council had, by law, to make a new plan, a new 6-year plan. And it was intended that it would be based on a local area plan for Tullamore, a specific plan that would deal with Tullamore itself. Otherwise, Tullamore was just another part of the county plan. And town plans were made for Dangan, Derry, Banagher, but no actual plan was made for Tullamore. What we got instead was a zoning map, which simply says it would be nice if these uses were here and those uses were there, and we don't want those uses here. So we don't really have a statutory plan for Tullamore right now. We do have these strategic employment zones, which I think are a very good idea. And I think there was a court case. There was a proposal, I think, to put an anaerobic digester in one of them, and that went to the High Court, who turned it down because it didn't have enough employment in it. So the employment zones are a very good idea. I think that the one in the northeast will be medical, biotech to associate with the regional hospital, and the one on the northwest will be for high tech. So I think they will be the future of Tullamore. Now, before I get to the actual plans that were recently made, I'd like to say something about the Irish planning system itself. I think we have a very, very good planning system here in Ireland. It's taken a while, but we've got an excellent system. The problem is it's under-resourced. We don't have enough planners to run it. We need about 500 more planners. It's also, we don't have enough judges to deal with the amount of cases that end up at law. But on the presumption that the new government will do something about that, I think we have a really good planning system here in Ireland. And we've just brought in a new planning act. I think it's an excellent act. We'll have to see how it works in practice. But it, I think, brings a lot more certainty, both to a developer or to a concerned resident. I think it's a clearer document in the end. And I should say a few things about generally the structure of the Irish planning system. I'm looking at present at what's going on in the UK. I think they're in a bit of a mess over there when it comes to planning, because they don't have a structure as we've got, but of course we've got to start using it. So at the top we have a national planning framework, and this sets the general picture. It estimates how much of a population will we have in the future. Present guess is we'll have about 1 million more by 2040. Where will they go? Roughly half will go to Dublin. The rest will be distributed largely to the cities Galway, Limerick, Cork. And then the national planning framework tries to work out how much housing will that require, how many jobs, what kind of jobs. And it also ties in with the north of Ireland. So you have a good structure generally, nationally, as to where we're going as a country. It nominates Athlone as the big hub in the Midlands, and it's the Midland hub, and it sees all the surrounding counties feeding into that. So Athlone is a national identity. And below then that you have the regional strategy, which tries to flesh this out at a local level. Tullamore is seen as a key town. Its strengths are tourism, high-tech, medical, biosciences. And particularly, I don't know if it's mentioned, but I would imagine should be mentioned, is the need for the N52 link. And I'm very conscious as to the need for that. And I really do think it should be progressed. And then finally, you get down to the county plan. And the Offaly County Plan, as a plan for the county as a whole, I think is a really excellent plan. I think its ideas for a green energy hub and road and things like that are top class, and I think it's an admirable plan for the county. But it's when it gets to Tullamore that I think the wheels fall off the wagon a bit. Under the new Planning Act, the next level down is what's called an urban area plan. And that's what Tullamore would or should have. And that, if you take national policy, means somewhere very, very compact, very attractive. And then below that again, there's one final level of plan that's called the priority area plan. This is a statutory system. So the priority plan might be something like the harbour, an area that we're really going to concentrate on. And then just one final comment on the national planning framework. All this is then supervised by the Office of the Planning Regulator. And this is a very interesting one because the Office of the Planning Regulator is the brainchild of a Tullamore man, Alan Mahon. Alan Mahon was the conductor of the Mahon Tribunal, and one of the conclusions he drew was that you needed some sort of coordination from the top down so that policy and ideas flowed down and the right decisions were made at the right level. And most importantly, that there was coordination and responsibility. And you didn't have a situation where some councils were outbidding others for projects and things like that. You had to look at things in a general, rational way. So that's the Office of the Planning Regulator, is to see that the plans coordinate and fit within a national planning framework. And that's the legacy of Alan Mahon. So now we come to how does this all work in Tullamore? And it was intended that a local area plan would be made for Tullamore within the context of the 2021-2027 development plan. And in order to inform that plan, the council commissioned consultants to prepare, well, not so much to prepare plans, but rather to come forward with ideas for 9 key sites in Tullamore, including the harbour. So the consultants were external. Well, sorry, that's not fair to say, because the consultants who did the harbour plan are Grafton architects, one of whom is Yvonne Farrell, who's from the Clara Road. So Yvonne knows Tullamore inside out. The other firms would essentially be newcomers and looking at Tullamore with fresh eyes. So there are 2 studies were prepared to give ideas for all these various sites, and the idea, ideally, these would then feed into the local area plan, which would then be adopted and become the plan for Tullamore. But things turned out the other way, and the council decided to go ahead with the smaller plans first, and we're still sorry, I should the other way around, that the local area plan would be made and give the context for the schemes that would then emerge at the local level. But it turned out the other way, that the local area plan still hasn't arrived. And this is probably an overview of the various sites that all the consultants have looked at. The big sites in Tullamore that are free, ready for development. And they've made general suggestions in an ideal world and said, look, wouldn't it be nice if they turned out like this? This is the specific one for the harbour, very detailed. And I've tried to put them together in my own drawing here, which tries to punch up where new buildings will be and add some ideas of my own. So I should stress that the plans which the consultants came up with are really their ideas, and they were put out for public consultation. Many bodies made their submissions, and the council considered them, gave them to the consultants, and the consultants have made their own responses, and there the matter lies. So we're in this funny position right now that it's not very clear what the next stage is. For example, just to give you some illustrations of the various ideas they've come up with, this would be the familiar view looking down the canal spur towards the harbour, and they're suggesting two very high buildings at the end, and then along the canal bank at Convent View there would be kiosks and things that would service the boats. This is the view looking along Harbour Street with the bungalow removed, and it's suggested that the wall along Store Street be retained and a building put above that. Again, in the harbour plan at least, no uses have been suggested. So they're really just suggesting forms. Many of the proposals in the harbour are to do with amenities, servicing boats, sailing, kayaking. It's not very clear, though, if the big buildings are for housing or for offices or high-tech or whatever. This is one particularly interesting proposal coming from the harbour study, which is the old Young's Stores, I think that's the name, but on Bury Quay, which is one of the oldest buildings in Tullamore. And they're suggesting that would be renovated and would be used as sort of in conjunction with the Greenway as a entry hub for Tullamore, so that's where tourists coming along the canal or coming along the Greenway would be the first place they'd encounter Tullamore, and maybe there'd be a tourist office there. These are all general ideas which are simply open for discussion. And this is an entry document for the regeneration studies. There's one particular, I won't say it's hidden in the regeneration framework plan, but I think it's a terribly significant document. Apparently a detailed traffic study was done for Tullamore, and the consultants, I think their name in a second, have come up with terribly interesting ideas for future public transport in Tullamore. And this underlines the plan. I don't know if it's been published publicly. It's there really as a sort of a small item of the larger plan. And it suggests that in future you'd have two high-quality public transport routes in Tullamore, one which would go from the extremities into the centre, and that at the ends there would be park and ride, which is this idea that you can come in, you don't have to come into the town, you can park there, get on the public transport and come in. And that's quite an innovative, this is the first time I've seen any quality public transport proposals for Tullamore. And it's well worthwhile looking at that online. Equally, they have come up with quite an interesting analysis of circulation routes in Tullamore and how one might walk around the town. Again, previously unexamined, and they very much want to use the river as a board, as open up the river to public to walking. And then they go into looking at individual sites and how they might develop. And this one, for example, is right where we are right now. And as you can see, Aldi is already built as part of it. The other buildings, they're suggesting would have been very much the footprint that was recently proposed in the big distillery yard proposal, the 13-storey building. But they are suggesting that 4 stories at max would be appropriate. This plan is for, I'm not going through them all, I'll just go through selected ones to give you an idea. The document is online, is well worth seeing. This plan is for the area off Rose Lawn and the tan yard. And they're suggesting that the area between the tan yard, between Rose Lawn and O'Connor Square, would be a new little civic space with housing round it, and the Lumley warehouse would be retained, and that along the riverside, the buildings which are along there might eventually be developed for high-density housing with a riverside park. And this is a sketch of the Cohen site. There is a permission on it for retail, but it's got about a year or so to run. And they're suggesting that the riverside frontage would be developed as a sort of a public route with high-ish density housing behind. The darker site here is what we used to know as Lily Roberts Garage, and facing onto Cormac Street. There's a peculiar thing here that in a lot of the layouts are quite unambitious, in the sense that as a former developer's hack, I would be looking for higher densities on a lot of them. They seem quite low density for centre city sites like that, but they're suggesting that would be for senior citizen living. Again, these are just ideas, and they're throwing them out there and saying, it might be like this. That's a detail of the Lily Roberts site. Is presently occupied by a car park, backs onto Schull Columcille, and they're suggesting again another little park with housing around it and 2 or 3 blocks and a new building opposite the Tullamore Court. This is the site beside the station, on the southern side of the station. And again, I was looking at the site myself this afternoon, and it's a site that you could actually do anything on. You could put, Tullamore Chamber of Commerce made a very good submission to the at the public consultation phase and suggested it would be great for a hotel or for some sort of business expo. But you could really do anything. And it seems to me that it's up to a private developer to suggest what you might do, because there are no constraints on it. So I'm inclined to think that their solution here is a little unambitious. And it's unclear as to how it actually would connect with the station. This is an interesting site. It's the old council yard beside the courthouse. And they're suggesting a very loose residential development on it, of probably no more than about 20, 30 houses. I did a study on it myself, and with, the kind of standards that the Department of Local Government is suggesting, you could get 70 own-door houses on it. So they're suggesting quite a low-density development with the access off Spollenstown and just a pedestrian access off Cormac Street. But looking at it this afternoon, it seems to me that there's no reason why you couldn't come in off Cormac Street. What has always struck me about that site is that it's in the council ownership. And if the council wanted to do a really state-of-the-art exemplary housing scheme, this would be an excellent place to do it, a mixture of social and affordable. And it would really, what's the word, copper fasten the credibility of Offaly County Council as a housing body. This is, I think wisely, they decided to leave the retail warehousing development on the tan yard, because it does work and it does have a function, and they just suggest filling in one or two of the sites, and then they suggest extending Arbutus Court, the housing scheme next door, by moving the carriageway in and getting another group of housing. So that's quite a sensible suggestion. I see the original of that is over there. The document, it's quite you need to go into it in a bit of detail. And in the end, they try to prioritise the various schemes that they've come up with and suggested, well, look, these are the ones that you could actually do tomorrow. These are the ones we think you should do. And I'm sorry we didn't include an illustration of it, I should have. And they suggested 3 schemes which are doable straight away and which the council should take on as projects. One is the improvement of the junction of Cormac Street and High Street, which is where you have the roundabout there in front of Acres Hall. And they're suggesting the pavement should be widened on the Lily Roberts side and it to make a better public space. The second project I think is very doable is an interesting one. To create a link, a pedestrian link between Millennium Square, which the council recently renovated, and Tara Street, or either of the lanes beside the Esker Art Centre. But this means going through the Bridge Centre car park, which is right now, as you've got to dodge cars. So they're suggesting that a deal be done with the Bridge Centre, which would give more space for pedestrians. But it's still, you're still dodging between cars. But I do think that's not a bad idea, because there isn't any link when you come over across the bridge at Millennium Square. You walk straight into a car park. The third project they suggest, and they prioritise, and suggest it should be high priority, is the pedestrianisation of Market Square and the turning of Market Square into a public space, more or less paved on the western side, on the High Street, the Colin Street side, and a semi-public park, a planted area on the east. And that if you go into the document, that's the one they really put their money on, saying, if you're going to make a statutory plan, this is the one that we should do. So I think that there's a dilemma then right now. Both of these plans acknowledge that they weren't conceived within the context of a local area plan. And under the new Planning Act, under the present Planning Act, within 2 years of the life of a development plan, you have to start making a new plan. So the time for making a new plan for Tullamore starts this coming September. So the council, I imagine, are in, the question is, do you start making a new local area plan now, knowing that the local area plan concept is outdated under present legislation, and that the correct plan would be an urban area plan? They're quite distinct. So it seems to me that the right answer to all this is to just hold off, just stop the clock on making a local area plan, and instead bend all the best efforts to making an urban area plan, which would fit into the new county plan, which will emerge in 2027. So, if we were to do that, it would be the first coherent, integrated plan for the centre of Tullamore. There's never been a plan for the centre of Tullamore. It's always been just a blob on a map with opportunity sites identified, but there's never been a coherent, joined up thinking. Where's parking going? You know, how do you walk around it? Where are the cycle routes? And if we are going to have an urban area plan, there are a number of other things that need to be done anyway. One is a traffic and transportation study. And it seems to me that the traffic and transportation study that was done already, even though it's a very, very small part of the framework plan, is worthy of, adoption and relooking. And it's a very important document, which I don't think has received the public debate that it deserves. Secondly, and I've been saying this for a long time, what Tullamore desperately needs is an urban heritage study. We need to have a look at the value of the streets and spaces. It's not just a collection of protected structures. We do need to know what's the value of O'Connor Square? What's the value of Market Square? Is Henry Street, a valuable urban space? And particularly if we are to have tall buildings, where are they? And I think this argument came to a head in the summer with the debacle of the Distillery Yard proposal. An extremely expensive application for a 13-storey building was made. It was supported by the Tullamore Chamber of Commerce and others, but it was dumped on by the planners and conclusively dumped on by On Board Planola on the grounds that it didn't accord with the streetscape study for Tullamore. But there's no streetscape study for Tullamore. There's no document that tells us which streets are worthwhile. So it's very difficult for a developer to formulate an important scheme in this vacuum, and it's very difficult equally for anybody who has an interest in the urban heritage at Tullamore to decide whether the proposals are good or bad. Another thing I think we need, and we've never had, is we've never really looked at the trees of Tullamore. Coming in the train today, I noticed that one of the first things you see coming in the train is the line of poplars along the canal. The two things that stick up are the spire of the Church of the Assumption and the line of poplars along the canal. We've just lost one out there, and I was looking at some of them, and they are they're probably heading towards the end of their life. But there are other groups of trees in Tullamore, like along the canal, on the spur into the harbour, along the northern bank of the river. And, tree groups do contribute to Tullamore, and they should be kept. And they should be also augmented. I was very disappointed a couple of years ago when the cherry trees were pulled up out of Bachelor's Walk and were replaced without very much thought as to what could have been an absolutely superb landscape avenue. I think that opportunity was lost. So you need a good look at trees in Tullamore. And to come back to the question of tall buildings, it's been agreed not agreed, but plans going back to 2010 suggest two locations for tall buildings in Tullamore now without any study. One is here where Aldi is, but that's not going to happen, and the board sat on that. The other one is in the harbour, and that's part of the proposals for the harbour. And I think that makes sense, because the water can assimilate a tall building. But it always seemed to me that there's one incredibly critical site in Tullamore which could take tall buildings. Historically, the only place in Tullamore we've ever had tall buildings, apart from the church, is Water Lane, where the towers, the distillery towers, and the really punctuate it. But that site at present is occupied by the remains of two warehouses. They're both in very bad condition. One is just a four wall standing, but they're protected structures, and I think that's wrong. Tullamore has been pretty sensitive about its industrial heritage. We've kept the bonded warehouse. Quite a number of the industrial heritage buildings at Tullamore, I don't think the buildings on that critical site are worthy of being kept. And I think they should be delisted, and I think that should be identified as a site for a tall building for historical reasons. And I think also one thing we need to look at is the designation of an architectural conservation area. Now, Tullamore is unique in being the only county town in Ireland which doesn't think that any of its central spaces are worthy of designation. The only architectural conservation area in Offaly is Geishel. Now, I suspect that may have a lot to do with resources, but nevertheless, I do think that, in walking in from the station this morning, and you walk down past the courthouse, the jail, it's intact. Every building is in good shape. It really looks terrific. It is, that is Tullamore. It is worthy of attention and being kept. Michael Byrne told me to put this in because it shows all the studies that contributed to the generation framework. I'm cynical about its inclusion because as a planning consultant who used to turn these reports out, it's just a boilerplate and put in there to earn your fees. And I'm going to leave you with one final image. Frank Gibney's plan was made in 1950. And so here we are in 2075, and it's coming to its conclusion. I think two very big projects will accelerate its completion. One is, because they're both going to be funded by the National Development Fund, one is the double tracking and electrification of the Dublin-Galway railway line. That will be an immense project, particularly on the stretch between the Spollenstown and Charleville Road bridges. But when that is in place, it will immensely increase connectivity with the capital, and that will have a dramatic impact on Tullamore. And the second one is the Shannon Partine to Dublin water main, which will deliver lots of water to Dublin, and that has a dedicated spur to Tullamore. It's one of the only two places that does. So Tullamore is going to get very good rail connectivity and water that can sustain particular kinds of industries. So I suspect that will probably lead to the redevelopment of the key lands which remain undeveloped between Charleville and Clonminch Road. So what happens beyond that? Nobody knows what the population of Ireland will be. In the week before Easter week, Patrick Pearse thought that the population might rise to somewhere between 20 and 30 million. In 1928, Eamon de Valera thought that was a little bit excessive. He thought 18 million would be better. So if we head towards even 7 million, what does that mean for Tullamore? It means that all the President's owned land is eaten up. Everything within the bypass is built. And what do you do then? How do you expand Tullamore? It'll have to be on environmental lines. I suggest that the transportation study in the framework plan gives a hint that you have high-capacity bus lines. One could, which they suggest ends in Cloncollogue, could be extended. And the lands north of the Geishel Road are mainly in the floodplain of the river, so you can't build on them. So why not flood part them, build on a little bit, and use the lands in between for new woodlands to create biodiversity. And then you could link all that with a loop off the Greenway, which would continue into Charleville. And it seems to me that, Charleville is a site of European significance, and we use it we're allowed to walk in, but I just wonder, should the access roads, cycling routes not be identified, maintained, and maybe as a trade-off for delivering those national greenway routes, the amenities, the historic amenities, the designed landscape, including the re-watering of the lake, which I remember as a lake up to 30 years ago, could be reinstated, and that becomes a tourist loop off the Greenway. So there's Tullamore in 2100. So I leave it up to yourselves. Thank you very much.